Good evening. Welcome to Street Talk. So tonight I have a very special guest for us, somebody that I've known for quite a long period of time, worked very closely with, and I'm very proud to have been chanting around different local schools when she was running for the 118th. Um, as I used to say, vote row A, it'll be okay. So that's probably going to be like my mantra when people come out to the polls on election day. But she's going to be running for city clerk in the city of Milford. I'd like to welcome Kim Rose, a good friend to us, and Milford legislatively on representing Milford. You're the one person we have left in the on the Democratic side, and obviously you're in leadership position up in the State House, and you're running for city clerk. So the first question everybody's going to ask: so why are you running for city clerk in Milford?
Thank you so much, Dominic. It's a pleasure to be here. And that's a great question. I've worked for the city of Bridgeport for the last 18 years. I don't know if people understand that when you're a state rep, it's considered a part-time position, although we work year-round, 24 hours a day. But most of us do have regular full-time jobs. I've been considering retiring from Bridgeport for the last year, and this opportunity came up this year and presented itself, and I thought that it just might be the right time to do it.
As our good mayor had to say the other day when we were doing the introductions, obviously, all Milford all the time.
Absolutely.
Now, city clerk. I guess this is a different position because it's one of the two paid positions. Obviously, mayor being the other in our city charter. What does the city clerk do?
The city clerk is responsible for all of the municipal land records, and as well as death certificates, marriage licenses, dog licenses, fishing licenses. She is also the board clerk for the Board of Aldermen in Milford. So it's a lot of record keeping, archiving, having records accessible to the public. They also do notary work as well as other items.
Now, you got a ton of experience working in this because in Bridgeport, what was your position in Bridgeport?
I'm an administrative specialist, basically running the office in Bridgeport, responsible for archiving hundreds and thousands of records for the city of Bridgeport. If someone comes in from the public and they need to get a plan or a map or a file from the 1950s, I'm responsible to know where and how to find that information.
So it's kind of like a natural fit that you're going from one place where you've been dealing with records and land records and everything else for a long period of time to city clerk in Milford. It's a very natural fit.
It really is, and a lot of our work in Bridgeport, as well as being city clerk and working in the city clerk's office, is being accessible to the public, providing great customer service. We have constituents, you have title searchers that come into the office all the time, and you need to be available and have those items that they need ready and be willing and able to share that with them.
Now, as some of these things have, I know like in Bridgeport, have they been like kind of digitalized, or is it still regular records that you got to go look up, so to speak?
Unfortunately, most of our records are still paper in Bridgeport. So it's physically taking the paperwork, boxing it up, inventorying it, sending it down to archives, receiving back a location number, recording that. Some of the things that I've done in Bridgeport, when I first came into the office, I changed the entire phone systems that we had. We were still in an antiquated system. I also created databases and linked databases so that if you're coming in for a particular property, you can just click on the address and you can pull up all of the permits that were taken out under that address. And that's not anything that we could have done before that. We would have to do it manually, go to the file cabinet, pull out the file and see what permits were falling underneath the the main building permits and such.
And I don't know if you've had an opportunity to take a look at what Milford's systems are as of yet. Is there any similarities to that, or?
Well, Milford does have, well, with land records, they have been putting them online because what you want to do is make it so it's accessible that really people shouldn't even have to come into the office much, that they can get the information that they need, especially title searchers who are, they travel all over the state. We get them in constantly, and it's a full-time job. They're going to 10, 15 building departments a week, as well as city clerks' offices and zoning, and because when they do a title search, they have to search all of the different departments.
And as you say, customer service is really important. I think one of the things that I notice is the turnaround in our own city hall is that obviously I think customer services have obviously improved under our current mayor. I know building department used to be number one list of complaints many years ago. I know I went down there when I was thinking of doing some work on my house, and I could see what some of the difficulties were within that. And now I think it's turned from a liability into an asset. If you look at the amount of construction that we have going on within our city, it's just it's incredible the amount of businesses that come in, and everywhere you look when you drive down the post road or through the green, there's all kinds of work going on everywhere. So obviously you have the experience. I know the thing I love about you is you're involved in this community, and you know what? You have so many different things that you volunteer for and are involved in. I know you do stuff for the Downtown Business Association. I know.
Well, I was actually a founding member. Many years ago, I had an antique and collectible store in the Green where the Froyo yogurt place is.
Okay, I know the building.
And we revamped the DMBA, and we were great. It was great. We had we started the horse and carriage rides at Christmas time. We used to have an annual sidewalk sale. At that point, there were quite a few other antique shops in Milford, so I worked with Bob Gregory, who was the economic director at the time, and we created a walking map of downtown Milford and the antique shops. And I got together with the other stores, and we did some co-op advertising regionally. And we had people coming in from all over New England with the map in hand, saying, "I'm here to shop. Where's the next store?" So it was a great driving force for Milford at the time.
I know you recently went over to Port Jeff. I know I go over there quite frequently, and that's one of the things that I like is they have a good map. You can walk around. And you know where to find different stores. And I think as far as Milford goes, we have like one of the best greens because we have the marina that comes in. People come in by boat. People can come in by train. You know, we're right off of the highway. We're accessible. I know our green businesses have continued to grow.
We have a very vibrant downtown area, and I'm very proud of that. Actually, they just put together some bags, little swag bags that they're going to be distributing down to the boaters that come in with items and maps and such, telling them where they can go.
That's good, because I know like a lot of people, they love coming to Milford. Well, it's got a great harbor, you know, and it's well protected, and it's a beautiful place to be.
Yes, I was actually chatting with two people that were on a bike one night down there, and their boat was, they had come in from Long Island, and they were biking up to the Green. It was probably 8:30, 9 o'clock, to go grab a bite to eat. So they were just, they love coming to Milford.
And I saw you on one of those. What's that bike that they have, that the coach that goes through Milford?
The party bike. The party bike. Yes. I'm just thrilled. Between Julie Nash and Mayor Blake, coming up with the idea of hiring the bike to come down to Milford a couple times this year. It came through Walnut Beach several times that I've, when I was down there for the concert series, and just tons of fun. We just hopped on. I wasn't pedaling, so I didn't have to do any of the heavy lifting. I was just sitting in the back enjoying the ride. But we got together and sang songs and made friends, perfect strangers, just hopped on, and we just had a great time. It was probably about a 5-minute ride.
I love that. That's definitely cool stuff.
I'd like to see it come back on a more regular basis.
Oh, maybe we can figure that out. And you also do work with the VFW?
I do. I'm a lifetime member at the VFW, Post 7788 in Devon. Been a member there for many, many years. I'm the former Ladies Auxiliary president. I'm very proud of the VFW. My son, as you know, is an Afghan war vet. And my dad was a World War II Navy fighter pilot. So we have a history in our family. I'm also a member at the American Legion over in Woodmont, and beautiful location. Just enjoy going over there and sitting on the back deck and enjoying a sunset.
I know I have my VFW 7788 hat that I got from my grandmother, or my wife's grandmother, who just turned 91. And she used to go there all the time because her husband was in the Coast Guard Auxiliary.
Right. They actually have an event coming up. I just posted it on Facebook. They're doing a POW remembrance ceremony, and that is open to the public. And it is the most moving ceremony you could ever hope. They just do a wonderful job there. It's open to the public. I encourage parents to bring their children. It's a great learning experience. Just a terrific event. And it's, I believe, September 19th at 7 o'clock.
And I love the fact that we treat our veterans with so much more respect than the ones that got left behind in Vietnam or during that time and era. And it makes me happy to see the level of respect that people who served in that time frame got, and the ones that come back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and everybody that walks around and thanks them for their service and their their selfless act, really for all of us. And I'm happy to say in the 40 years that I've lived in this country now, 40 plus years, that's certainly something that's changed over time.
It has, and I'm very glad to see that we've woken up and learned a lesson. And unfortunately, it was a lesson, sadly, on the backs of the Vietnam veterans that came back to not such a warm welcome. And they have still so many issues. There's still some homeless ones, mental health and addiction problems. I'm a proud member also of the Veterans Committee in Hartford. I've been on that committee for the last 7 years since I was elected, and we've done some great work, and we're always looking for ways to help veterans in any way that we can, especially the ones that were left behind.
Well, I know. I mean, obviously, this last set of wars really touches something that I deal with, and that's brain injury. Just because of the level of explosives and other things, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. And they're tough issues,
They are very tough issues. My son is a 100% disabled veteran who has post-traumatic stress syndrome. When he came back home, he literally disappeared in his room for a couple months. Didn't want to come out. He ate, he showered, but did very little else. And he's been struggling with it, and they all struggle. The suicide rate is just crazy. He lost 7 men from his unit in the first couple of years that they returned from suicide, which affects those left behind also. They start thinking.
I know. You know what? Few years ago, I had one of my best friends that I grew up with that committed suicide, and I know it's a difficult topic for people. It's difficult for people to understand how somebody can get to that place. But it really, for our veterans, points out just the difficulties. And, whether you talk about people that you went there with and they didn't make it back, like you have survivor's guilt. You have the tragedy of being in a war zone, which is really, it's not the way it used to be, like in World War II, or where you're literally in an urban environment, and I'm sure you have to look every which way around you and dealing with that. And, I think the VA has gotten better with some of this stuff. I know years ago I had some interactions with them where I was working with somebody who was brain injured, who was a woman who was in the Navy, and they went outside of their network because they realized that they didn't have the people to be able to provide such services. And it's difficult to build those things up. But I think on a state level, I think we've really reached out to a lot of veterans, talking about our trying to end veteran homelessness. I know you could probably speak a little bit towards what we've done within that, because I think it's important for people to know this.
We've really done a fantastic job. I commend the Department of Housing Commissioner Von Klein, the governor, and Sean Connolly, the Veterans Commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
They've done a fantastic job. We really have pretty much eradicated veterans homelessness in the state. There's veterans vouchers, homeless vouchers, that provide housing for homeless veterans. The commissioners opened up additional housing up in Newington,
Mm-hmm.
at the facilities up there, and we've really made a lot of strides. Not to say that there aren't some that have fallen through the cracks, and there's some great homeless shelters that have beds specifically set aside for veterans, and they do keep them full. So it's not 100% because situations change. If a veteran was not homeless yesterday and maybe he's in a family situation and needs to get out, there's a temporary homelessness, but we've pretty much eradicated it. I'm very proud of that.
And I know how well the community comes together, and other veterans helping other veterans. I know I was at a Spartan race, not last weekend, the weekend before, and it really warmed my heart. They had disabled vets going through the course. And at the end, they have sort of like the slanted wall that you have to use the rope to kind of climb up. There were a group of, I believe it was 10 vets that were together, and they were helping this person who had just one arm and one leg, and they were standing one on shoulder on top of each other, helping them to get this person over. And it just shows what a community can do when everybody comes together. And that's a symbolic, obviously, gesture, but I think it's it's true of what I feel people look at our vets today. But a lot of the stuff is very introspective, and it's very personal, and they live with their own thoughts, and it's very hard to be able to come out and discuss that. And obviously, I think it's important, that people are aware of those things. And I think every generation's had its different version of what they called it. When you came back from Korea or World War II, you were shell-shocked.
Right.
They're all, post-traumatic stress disorders always been there after war. It's whether anybody was able to label what it is, and I think they're fortunate. There are treatments out there for it, and obviously, we hope that they reach out towards that. And I know one of the things we talk about mental health stuff here is to remove the stigma of it, because it's a hell that they come back from, literally, and I always think of mental health as there's certain things that your brain has which are like defense systems. And for some people, you can turn that switch on and off. And after you've been through something like that, it's very hard to turn those things on and off. They're kind of like, it's just like a heightened awareness of being what you've been through and everything else along those lines.
Exactly.
So now I know last session, miracle upon miracles.
I know where you're going with this.
Yes, I do.
I know exactly where you're going.
We're going to talk about affordable housing because you had a huge part in this. And I can't say enough about what it takes for a body that is Democratic governor, Democratic in the House, as well as technically Democratic in the Senate, even though it's split. You have Nancy Wyman on there that carries the vote to override a veto. And there was only one override of a veto, and that was around affordable housing and the changes that were put forth by a huge bipartisan group of people. I guess talking about the 830G, I know a lot of people don't understand what this is. They just look at it and they look at the repercussions from it from their standpoint. But what is the 830G?
We're going to need another hour segment.
Well, see, I told you it wasn't that hard to be able to
I'll try to give you the
you
short
can
version.
give me the short version. We can get it.
Affordable housing is a state statute, which is 8-30G.
Mm-hmm.
It was signed into law about 30 years ago. And the intent of the bill and the law was to encourage affordable housing throughout the state of Connecticut. As you know, our inner cities house most of our poor segment people because they have low-income housing, as well as more affordable housing than some of the other outlying towns and cities. So it was a way for them to try to encourage spreading it out. Giving people the opportunity to move out of the inner cities and into the suburbs, and to give them an affordable option in order to be able to afford to live. Now, it's important to stop for a second and talk about low-income housing and affordable housing.
Yes.
Low-income housing is subsidized housing, whether it be Section 8 or some vouchers. Affordable housing is based on the median income of a town, and it can be 30% of the median income, and it would reduce the amount of rent or the purchase price of a home. So again, the intent of the bill was great. It was intended to subject towns and cities that not otherwise would build affordable housing to encourage the building of affordable housing. Well, in Milford, as you know, we've seen more than our fair share. It's a situation that a couple of other towns, such as Fairfield, is experiencing, but not many others. And, as we talked about before, Milford has the harbor, we have the trains, the buses, 95, we have the Merritt Parkway.
Most importantly,
and
we have sewers.
We have sewers. Which, there's many towns and cities that don't have that. So we have the infrastructure. And let's face it, we're a great community. People want to live here. We have a great school system. Our taxes have been held to a really reasonable rate. They haven't gone up in the last couple of years. And people want to live in Milford. So 7 years ago, when I was elected, I was, my second term, I was appointed vice chairman of the Housing Committee. So for the first year, I worked with the chairman, Larry Butler from Waterbury, and I kept whispering in his ear, Larry, 8-30G, 8-30G. I said, Kim, we can't even talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it. So the second year I said, let me try something different. So I went to Larry and I said, Larry, look, I need you to understand what's happening in Milford. It's not like what's happening anywhere else in the state of Connecticut. We're getting developers coming in, buying tiny pieces of property, and they're dumping 10 and 15 units when really it should be a single family house. And they're going 3 stories up, and they're all over the place. They're dotting into all of our neighborhoods. And he was kind enough to accept my invitation. So he came down, and the mayor and I and several other local officials, we drove Larry around, and we showed him the diversity of the housing that we really do have in Milford, and we welcome that. We have the senior housing, we have Milford Beach Apartments, and then we did show him some of the proposed developments as well as some of the developments that were being built at the time. From that meeting, he looked at me and he said, I get it. It's not a matter that Milford doesn't want to have people in that can afford a lower rent. I see what's happening here. And he committed to me at that point that he would work as hard as he could to help me get some relief from Milford and change the law. And Larry was good to his word. It took us 6 years of trying and public hearings and suggestions. This year we were able to finally craft a bill that we could get enough people to support that would encourage affordable housing, yet give some relief to some of the towns and cities such as Milford. It was months and months of negotiations. We had pressure right from the governor's office and the Housing Department of Housing right from the get-go. We had pressure from them during the negotiations. They kept trying to insert other language into the bill that we knew we couldn't, if we inserted it, it would not pass. It was a bipartisan bill. We had a lot of support from Republican leaders as well as my own caucus. And I have to thank my leadership as well, Joe Erison and Matt Ritter, for their support on getting it called to the floor. So we passed the bill. We got it passed in the House. It went up to the Senate. Senator Schlossberg did a phenomenal job, also working with her colleagues against all odds, because there are still many people that were not supporting the bill. She got it passed through the Senate. And good to the governor's word, it got up to his desk and he vetoed it. That was something I was threatened with during all the negotiations. So we had the task now of coming back, getting leadership to, convincing leadership and working with them to get them to bring it to our caucus, which they were kind enough to do. Larry and I spoke to our caucus. At that point, the day we called it for a veto override, the governor's office and the Department of Housing had been calling our colleagues all weekend, asking them to pull their votes. So the day we were running the override, literally all day long, Larry and I were facing our colleagues coming up and saying, look, I supported the bill the first time around. I can't give the vote on the override. So it came time to run it. And Larry called the bill. He brought the bill out, and the vote was called. And literally, you've been up there. You know how that board is hard to see and hard to count. So we're trying to count red and green votes. And so, Larry, you know what we're going to do? We're going to close our eyes. And when the speaker says, lock the board, we're going to open it. We needed 101 votes. And that's what we did because it was impossible. It was driving us crazy trying to count them. And we opened our eyes, and there was 101 votes, exactly what we needed for the override. Then, again, back up to the Senate, where Senator Schlossberg's job was to get it passed through the Senate, and she got it passed with exactly the number she needed. It was pretty much a historic day.
I'd say.
To get an override, especially with the breakdown of the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
We're so close with between Democrats and Republicans, and
I don't think people really understand what it takes to actually get a bill passed, and that when you're dealing with the state of Connecticut, you have so many different constituencies. You have urban versus suburban. People have, different ideas about things. You have Republican versus Democrat. So to all those people out there that I've ever heard bash, and I've heard people bash about, oh, well, how come they couldn't have like gotten this done like earlier or do all this stuff, that to get something like this passed is monumental. And the effort that it takes to get these things passed is just incredible. And I think some people take it for granted how difficult it is. And I know I went up there and I testified on this. And one of the things I said, you know, you got 151 towns, and everybody's got different interests, different points of views, and you know, to come together on something like this, especially from Larry, you're a blessing, my friend. But to do this, it was just incredible, the amount of effort and the sustained effort and the year over year, and you know, and some people are going to say, well, you know, it doesn't seem like it was like enough. So what exactly did they get changed?
It's never enough. And
It's
you're
not.
right. I mean, it's incredibly hard to get a bill passed that is common sense.
Yeah.
Let alone something that as contentious as this. Just to give you a little background, probably 12, 13 years ago, there was an affordable housing, an 8-30G application that was going in across the street from my house, which is where I started off with coming into politics, so to speak. I was just a stay-at-home mom, and we saw a little sign on the property across the street, and my neighbors were like panicking, saying we can't have 7 buildings and the traffic and whatnot. So I became an 8-30G expert within days, because I had to catch up and find out what is this bill? What does it mean? At the time, Speaker Jim Amon was my state representative, and he was also Speaker of the House. And I called him. I said, Representative, Mr. Speaker, we need to do something. This is terrible. And at that time, he said, Kim, no one will ever change 8-30G. Those were my fighting words. So to get back to your question, you have advocates who are advocating for low income and affordable housing, and I completely understand their point of view and their advocacy. I agree with them. There is not enough in the state of Connecticut. It's just so difficult, as you said, to get past the personalities, what each town and city needs. It's very difficult, again, even with a common sense bill.
I know I certainly went and I tried to talk to a few people myself, and they all looked at me like, you know what, you can ask for anything else, but just don't ask me to vote. I'm like, well, I'm not actually asking to vote. I'm just asking you not to block it. And that's why I say it's, you know, there's a good, you know, core of our urban communities that did. You know, they wanted something different, or they don't want any changes at all. So now, some of the things that were included in that were specifically to Milford. I believe Ryder Park is one of them.
We included Ryder Mobile Home Park specifically to be allowed to be counted towards affordable housing, because it was already deed restricted to a certain extent, but not specifically the way the state statute read. You know, and by virtue of it being a mobile home park, it's generally more affordable than a single-family home. We're offering more points for senior housing. I am particularly concerned about the lack of senior housing in the state of Connecticut. Our population is aging. We can't afford to stay here. I hear it all the time. People can't afford to retire. You know, people are living on fixed incomes. They want to stay in the state where they raise their families. Many times, you know, my family's here, my grandchildren. I don't want to leave Connecticut, but we really need to encourage senior housing to be built so that our seniors can, get out of their bigger homes and something more comfortable and um, something that they can afford that won't be such a strain on them every month. So that's one thing that I'd like to work on also.
I know when I go and certainly I've been knocking doors, obviously, in my own campaign and handing out our flyer over here for Kim's. I do hear a lot of that, and I know the people who love Milford. A lot of them they do. They like to age in place. I know my community was built back in like the mid '50s. I know it's just turning over now, but people lived there their whole entire life, and it's not a surprise that people want to stay in this city because of everything from our downtown to all the stores that we have available, and all the terrific amenities. But it's an issue that we are a graying society. I know I got my grays in here every once in a while. As to making sure that we have the diversity of housing available to them, and when you talk about affordable, I think, like you were saying, people make the mistake of thinking that affordable is low income housing, and affordable housing, I believe, was originally designed to make sure that people who were firemen, policemen, could be able to live in the community, or afford a community that they work in.
Absolutely, kind of the middle income earners, but also, and I agree with the cities as well. There is just not enough low income housing either. Unfortunately, there's people that are finding themselves out of work at the age of 40 and 50. They're losing their homes. They're out of unemployment. Where do they go? Where do they go?
Or the ones that I deal with, which are disabled population. And I know families quite often, they string together, and they have people come in and live with them. We need to be able to provide access to housing that they can be able to afford, and I think it's one of those things that I think it's incumbent upon our communities to be able to get that. And like you said about the housing that gets put on what I call the postage stamp properties, this is what I face at the doors as well too. Is I get people that are they're worried about their communities, and they're worried that somebody's going to buy up a piece of property and they're going to stick like 10, 11 pieces on it. I know it's at the corner because I see them all the time. Some of them are not as bad as other ones because they're on a main road, such as the ones on Gulf Beach. They're not quite as bad. There's a cemetery across the street, and but I know when I come out of Silver Sands, the ones that I look at, they're the people that have like this big, I don't know, it almost looks like a 4-story monstrosity because they did the roofs up like so high. And I don't want, if I was living right there, I wouldn't want somebody looking into my, their first floor, looking into my bedroom window, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a way to be able to do things appropriately, and it just gets crazy.
Well, a lot can be said for what the cities still do have and always have had control over with 8-30G.
Mm-hmm.
Many times, and I've heard it from our own planning and zoning board, comments such as, our hands are tied. I hear from the city planner all the time at the meetings when he advises the board, oh, it's 8-30G, there's nothing you can do. And that's simply not true.
Mm-hmm.
The planning and zoning board has always had the ability to limit the amount of units, to limit the height, to set restrictions on setbacks. impervious surfaces, location of dumpsters, insist on certain height fencing, um, landscaping, so that they are always able to approve an application with reasonable conditions. And, that would have avoided some of the issues that some of these developments are facing because they just approved them, they rubber stamped them as they were, as the developer came in and applied for them. So they had the ability to approve with conditions which they didn't take advantage of, and I'm sorry that they haven't done that in some of the instances. The one, such as you mentioned, on Meadowside, my friends live right behind there. If you notice along the fence, there's a driveway. Well, there's a house back there. And literally sitting in their living room or their front yard, they're looking straight up at 3 stories.
Or I think the other one was Lamplight. That's exactly the same set of circumstances. So I know they did, because I sat through the last meeting when they talked about Seaside Avenue, that they made some conditions to try to change and limit some of the effects of it. So
the other ability that the board has is to do an overlay zone. If they designated an area for 8-30G development and encouraged it and said, well, this would be an appropriate area, under the statute, they're actually awarded more points for that.
So it would be good. It would be good for us if we found those specific areas that we want to be able to push forward.
Absolutely, I think if I'm not mistaken, the City of Milford took advantage of a $30,000 grant to study that. I'm not quite sure, honestly. I've been so involved up in Hartford just trying to get something through for us to give us some relief. I'm not quite sure where that went with the Planning and Zoning Department and the board.
Well, I guess I'll be one of those people that will be going and ask those questions. as I've been known to be a little relentless whenever I get on something that I think is important, which I do. I think it's important on 2 ends. It's not just people feeling like their neighborhoods are being invaded and being taken advantage of. It's also like having the diversity and making it available. And like I said, I'm fortunate. One of the gentlemen that I work with lives in Milford. He's got Section 8. He's lived in that house for the last 19 years. And his landlord used to live right across the street from him. She passed away. She actually put it in her will that it got transferred over to her daughter, that she knew that she would continue to have him live there, and it's passed on to her daughter, that they make sure that he has that opportunity to continue to live there, because that's his home.
Wow.
And this is his community, and people who have ties to the community, some people for no cause of their own, either car accidents or other things that happen to them, they wouldn't do as well if they didn't live in a community that they're accustomed to. All his friends are in that community. He knows everything down that way.
He's comfortable. He's comfortable there.
He is, and he's in Devon, and we get to, the other night we walked down to the boardwalk from his house, and we get to go past Walnut Beach Creamery, and that's his touchstone is knowing that he lived in this community within a quarter mile of where he grew up, and he's been there for such a long period of time. And if more people looked at that kind of situation and understood that people face difficult circumstances, whether it's not being able to make the same amount of money as, but close to it. I have friends right now she's in a similar situation. She's single mom. She has 2 children. She wants to keep her kids in the Milford school system because that's what they've known all their lives. She has her other son that helps, out with stuff. And she's going around looking for, a reasonable rent and for a 2-bedroom apartment, they're like $1,500. I think she was fortunate to find a small house that she's trying to rent. But it's difficult. It is.
Well, even the 1-bedrooms under the 8-30G in some of these developments are $1,200 and $1,300.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
It is.
That's a lot of money.
And,
especially when you see gas prices upward up to almost $3 a gallon now.
Yeah. I guess that's I make the point about this because I want people to understand, you know what, it's more common than you think. I mean, I was lucky enough to be able to afford a down payment on a house because of my wife. So, not everybody has that amount of money, and some people have been through tough times, whether through the recession and they lost their houses due to foreclosure. These are the people that are part of your community that would be lost.
Exactly.
I know I go on and on, right? So I'll talk about one other thing, because I know what kind of a fierce advocate you are. That you took on something from my family that we're all very appreciative of. I know you know my son. My son goes and campaigns for Kim.
And I thank God that he's on my side. I certainly wouldn't want him at the doors saying, "Don't vote for Kim Rose." She's dead.
Yeah, I love him. We're at doors. You're gonna vote for us, right? That's his comment.
And how does somebody say no to that?
Yeah, he can't turn down my 7-year-old. It's pretty hard. I think the worst I got. Well, no, I'm definitely thinking about it. But my son has a rare disease, and one of the things that we've been trying to get up and running was this rare disease task force that got passed as a law but was mishmashed in a budget implementer. This is like part of the crazy process of trying to get legislation through, is that not everybody agrees with you, and certainly you would think something as simple as rare disease people would be a no-brainer for. So we had tried to, because this group had not met for over a couple of years, we'd tried to write another bill, and I know you were like the first person I called. Like at the last, it was due to be
It
like
was literally a deadline. The next day
Yes.
was our deadline to get a bill in.
And you were kind enough to write it and get it in for us, and I know that kind of was like the hop in the pants, so to speak, to get people moving on it. But we asked you, and you volunteered to be part of this task force, and I know you were there at our side when we were testifying, and I can't thank you enough for it. I know how important this is to my family. My wife's on the task force with you, and she's truly very happy that you're there, and that literally you negotiated some of the changes that we asked for into the bill, and I can't thank you enough for that, as well as Jonathan Steinberg, who I will thank publicly. Even though I know I harassed him quite a few times.
Oh, yes. Dominic, that was another one of those no-brainers, and you called me the night before. that morning at like noon was our deadline to get a bill in. It was my honor. I love Mikey, and I understand the challenges that the rare disease community faces. The bill as it was written, it had some issues, and there were many issues with the task force not meeting. I commend Jonathan Steinberg as well. He worked very closely with me and was kind enough to appoint me to the commission. Friday will be my first meeting, actually, and I'm looking forward to it. I've had numerous emails from the leadership of the committee So they're on board and they're getting ready. They want to go full steam ahead. So it got to the point where I think this was a little kick in the pants that was needed for this community.
Sometimes you need those things. I know there are so many different things that are going on up when you go up to Hartford. It's hard to keep track of everything that goes on. I know I certainly try to from time to time be good about it. And you know what? You have to show up. And I know that's what you do. Anytime that a constituent calls you, anytime that there's a meeting, I always know Kim Rose is going to be right there, and she have her cell phone out and her email on, and if there's an issue, like I said, you're one of the fierce advocates that I call for Milford. On so many issues, and unafraid to ruffle a few feathers every once in a while.
I thrive on it. As sick as that is, I do.
Thank God for that. So I know we're coming up. There's going to be a budget vote. I think it'll probably be on after this goes through. I know one of the things that you're up there fighting for is to make sure we get our education laid.
Yes, we are actually caucusing tomorrow. The budget vote is scheduled for the 14th. Mm-hmm. I know that because I was planning on a vacation with my daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren, so I have to change my vacation mm-hmm. plans. Absolutely. Milford is my number one. I mean, obviously we have numerous issues with the state budget, changes that need to be made on a grandiose scale. Mm-hmm. Then my first and foremost is always Milford. As the figures were presented to me, as of today, our ECS funding has been restored, and it looks like Milford, instead of the $13 billion cut that the governor proposed, we're looking at a $1.5 million cut, which is something that we're not happy about, but every town and city is going to suffer some cuts. And in retrospect, with others' comparison, we're not doing so bad with that.
No, and if you added in the teachers' pension stuff, I think we were looking at one point at $18 million in cuts, which would have had devastating effects on our tax base.
Will there be things in that budget that I don't want to vote on?
Yeah,
absolutely. But it's sometimes you have to take the hit and vote for something because if I'm a no vote on the budget, it could stand to lose more money. So there's compromise and
yes,
negotiations with all the votes.
It's a difficult position, and I think we're fortunate that there was some pre-planning for some level of this, even within our aldermanic budget, that they actually, I think, reduced it by about $1.9 million on the last end run. So I mean, if everybody votes yes, please, Milford I think will be all right on this. And I know the way that life goes, especially with these things, like you were saying when you were counting the numbers on the board, I think they know before they bring this out, hopefully, and I think that's what they decide in caucus, is the end negotiations.
They're not going to bring out a bill, and this goes generally through the session, is, yeah. We have so little time, and, it doesn't make any sense to call a bill that is not going to pass, although we did do a few this year,
sure,
just to get the discussion going. But if something's going to be filibustered, why would you take up 7, 8, 9, 10 hours when you could be getting some bills passed that really make sense and need to be passed? Good bills die every year, unfortunately.
They do. I've been fortunate enough to have a good record on that with the ones that I've certainly supported, and it's, like I said, it's a difficult process that people don't realize. 151 towns.
Everybody has an
Ev- ev-
agenda. They all
everybody's-
have their own needs.
Yes, they do.
And we need to learn to work together as well to understand each other's needs and support each other.
So I think we're down to the last like 2-3 minutes because you told me that you didn't think you could speak for an hour. Actually, I'm down to the last minute. So is there anything you'd like to say to your constituents before we sign off here?
I would just like to say thank you for the honor of serving Milford. I love what I do. I would love, as the mayor said, be all Milford all of the time. It's just a great place to live, and I'm grateful. I'm very blessed for the friends that I've made along the way, and a lot of my constituents are now my friends, and that's just the best part of all of this.
As they say, the small city with a big heart, but I know the person I'm sitting across from has a big, huge heart, and she gives it all to Milford. So thank you very much for coming out here, Kim.
Thank
I
you,
really
my friend.
appreciate it. And with that, I think we can run the street.